大家好，欢迎收看联合国周报，我是主持人鲍嫣然。在上一期的节目当中，我们讨论了小岛屿国家所面临的环境挑战。这些国家由于地理和资源的限制，很容易受到气候变换和环境污染的影响。为了应对这些挑战，联合国成立了一个专门的组织——小岛屿发展中国家联盟。首先，我的同事 Pauline 将讨论为什么要成立小岛屿发展中国家联盟，以及联合国的这个组织在帮助小岛屿国家应对环境挑战、实现可持续发展方面的关键作用。
Small island developing states, or simply SIDS for short, are essentially the states that are suffering the most and the first from the devastating consequences of climate change. For example, you definitely came across breathtaking pictures of places like the Maldives on social media. Well, in case you didn't know, they're at risk of completely disappearing in just a few decades. Why? Because of the impacts of climate change. The ice on the poles is melting, the sea's rising, and there's also hurricanes and many other consequences that affect SIDS differently because of how unique they really are. A few examples of how the UN has been helping SIDS are pushing for climate finance, and of course, by helping them create and sustain resilience, which includes building stronger homes. Are you interested in learning more about how the climate is affecting SIDS? You can go to news.un.org and you can search SIDS.
接下来 UN Weekly 主持人 Connor 将带我们前往多米尼加。多米尼加共和国作为加勒比海的一个岛国，拥有丰富的自然资源。特别是在清洁和可再生能源的开发方面，仍然有巨大的潜力。让我们去了解一下这样的小岛屿国家在环境保护和可持续发展方向所面临的挑战，以及他们正采取的措施。
You're in the most beautiful geothermal site in the world, the Rosa Valley, Loda to be specific. And this is the most visited, should I say, tourist site on the island. Very beautiful. Cool, pristine, and we're hoping to keep it that way.
But I would imagine not many tourists will come to exactly this spot that we're on now. What's happening right here?
Well, we are right here. This site is actually a site for reinjection for geothermal power plant. We chose geothermal not because it's easy, but because it has the potential to transform Dominica, not only for energy, but for livelihoods, creating more opportunities for businesses and of course reducing the cost of electricity to families. But of course there's always the benefit of the environment, which is the primary benefit. That one we hoping we can maximize to get to the point one day where we will have 100% of our electricity demand being met by renewable energy. And I should say, before I continue on the geothermal path, we in the Rosa Valley, this is also the location of our hydroelectric power plant. And we already have 20 up to 30% on a good year of electricity being generated from hydropower.
But most of it's coming from diesel right now, which...
So the other 70% comes from diesel. And
like most island, I mean, it's normal. Most island countries have this.
Well, we're better than most islands. We have 30% hydro, and that has been so since 1950. So we are already ahead. And we have some solar and some wind, but primarily we are slightly better than our neighbors, or even throughout the world.
But still, at the moment, majority diesel, it's expensive, I'm sure.
Very expensive, very expensive. Even with hydro, electricity rates in Dominica are pretty high, one of the highest.
So for the region, you're pioneers, aren't you, for this transition to low carbon technology?
Well, we're in good company. Nevis, the island of Nevis, St. Kitts and Nevis, they were ahead of us in terms of test drilling. They did their wells before, but they had their own challenges. So they sort of fell back a bit. But they're moving ahead, and I know that progress is being made. St. Vincent and the Grenadines also, they drilled a few wells. They've not been as successful as Dominica, but they've also made investments. And Grenada has done some surface studies and hoping that they can move. St. Lucia had wells drilled in the 90s, but they were not successful
And it's, a lot of it's down to finance, and this is the big issue. Let's talk a bit more about finance and what we call climate finance,
Let's talk about that.
which I know many countries, including yours, have been calling for more assistance from larger economies at UN climate conferences and other forums. Let's talk a bit about that. I mean, it's not just a problem for you, it's a problem for your neighbours. When you have these discussions at international forums, what are you pushing for now in terms of help to move to a cleaner economy?
Well, that's a very, very complex, not the question, but the answer. So I'm trying my best to simplify it in my mind. But developing geothermal power is very expensive. It's very, very expensive, and even more so for small island states, because remoteness, the cost, diseconomies of scale, and all these things that we normally see in the literature, which are true. In our case in Omnico, we were fortunate because we got a combination of grants and concessional loans in order to get to where we are. So let's move now to climate financing. We are now accessing green climate funds from the Caribbean Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank to construct the power plant. But our biggest partner has been the World Bank and the government of the United Kingdom, at some point the government of New Zealand, and recently the US government have all contributed grant funding for technical support and sometimes for actual hardware in the case of the UK, where we were able to utilize $10 million for drilling. So the financing part has to be looked at in two separate, should I say, sections. One, we need to look at the actual initial work. Who finances that work that determines that in fact there is the resource? And that is where grant funding or some sort of contingent grant funding become very important. Very, very important. So all of the talk that is going on about renewable energy, especially with geothermal energy, if the international community is serious, there has to be some upfront investment by way of grant funding to determine those resources.
在多米尼加，我们可以看到，在联合国的帮助下，当地政府和社区在保护环境、利用可再生资源方面所做出的努力。尽管面临诸多挑战，但他们的行动和联合国的支持，仍让我们看到无限的希望。